There's something I strongly believe needs to change rapidly and dramatically at West Ham United. Well, there's probably a few things, but I'm focusing on this one subject today, and that is the player development of our youngsters. How do we take our talent from the under-18s and the under-21s into the first team? How do we bridge that gap? Getting them from potentially good enough to the Premier League to being good enough for the Premier League. How do we go about it? Because I think there's very, very little evidence that the club know how to do it. We've got Divine Mubama on the fringes of the first team at the minute. He's on the bench every week, but struggling to get onto the pitch. In the past, we've had Ben Johnson, we've had Declan Rice, but these examples are few and far between, and I would argue there's not enough examples of them coming through at the minute. Exceptional talents, players that are doing it in spite of West Ham and not because of West Ham. It doesn't feel like there's this inevitable success of the academy set up because of what West Ham have in place, that these youngsters have the best chance of making it at the first team. And in the past, you could point to the under-18s and under-23s, as it were, and say, well, they're not good enough. That was valid. Those reasons were valid. The players were not good enough. I will always argue that I don't think it's as straightforward as that because of the player development aspect. However, when you look at players that have moved on from West Ham, none of them have gone on to achieve lots in the game, yet they have successful careers, but not at the Premier League level. There's not enough examples to say that the club have got anything massively wrong. However, when the under-18s win the league, win the FA Youth Cup, when the under-21s are performing really well, it's difficult to say they're not good enough now. For their age group, they are good enough. So how do we go about bridging that gap? Because I don't think we had a good January transfer window. However, there was one thing I think the club got really wrong, and that was the loan move of Callum Marshall to West Brom. At the time, I suspected it was the wrong thing for Callum Marshall. Well, 7 games later, I'm even more convinced it was the wrong thing for Callum Marshall. And the club cannot afford to get these wrong. Especially if we're going to go into this new era of purchasing players with Tim Steidten at the helm. If we're going to back him and go about how he wants to go about things in the transfer window, that player development part, when at the club, is absolutely crucial. You add in FFP at the minute, you add in the Tim Steidten thing, we need to get this right. And I do worry that we don't know how to get it right. We're not getting it right. And I think Callum Marshall's loan move is evidence of that. That's what we're going to be discussing today. The video is kind of split in two, a bit about Callum Marshall's loan move to West Brom, then about player development and my big concerns over it, truth be told. If you're new around here, please do subscribe, drop a like on the video as well if you enjoy it by clicking the thumbs up, and if you fancy supporting the channel you can go to patreon.com/HammersChat where you can get more videos, enter into giveaway, this kind of online store, and we do a prediction competition for every single game with an addict. If an addict wins it, winning a signed shirt. Links in description, pinned comments, any support is massively appreciated. Right, let's start with Callum Marshall then, and I want to be completely clear right now. I do not blame Callum Marshall at all. I still have big hopes for Callum Marshall at West Ham. I just think between now and the end of the season, we're not going to see much of him in a West Brom shirt. When he joined West Brom in the January transfer window, I felt it was too good. Going to West Brom, who were in the playoffs in the Championship, and they still are, and they should finish in a playoff position in the Championship as well. But I just felt that it was too good a club to go to. Nevertheless, off he went. Now, there is a mitigating circumstance around Marshall's lack of minutes so far, but I do think that is sort of overruled to some extent. I'll explain in a second. But this is how Callum Marshall's minutes at West Brom look like so far. You can see there in his first game, he got 28 minutes against Birmingham. Didn't come off the bench against Ipswich in a 2-2 draw. Came on in the last minute against Cardiff. Then he got 26 minutes against Southampton. And that's the 26 minutes I've seen of Marshall in a West Brom shirt. In the last 3 games, he hasn't came on. Obviously, one of them, the Hull City one, is the one you'd look at because they needed to win that game. They were drawing, and Hull City are just below them in the Championship, who, by the way, are doing absolutely fantastic at the minute. I'm really impressed by the job at Hull City, and some really good players there as well. We're not here to discuss Hull, we're here to discuss Callum Marshall. Now, the one thing I think the club couldn't have planned for, maybe they could have worked it out, or they probably did do their business and didn't realise this, but after signing Marshall, West Brom went and signed Mickey Johnson on loan from Celtic, who I always thought when he was really young at Celtic there was big hopes for him, and I thought he'd go on to become a top player for him. Hasn't really worked out at Celtic yet. He's not gone on to be as good, but at West Brom he's been absolutely fantastic so far. So they signed Mickey Johnson after Callum Marshall, and he's getting minutes at West Brom. So is Grady Diangana still. He's still getting minutes. So I've got a little bit of sympathy with the club in that regards. However, what also happened was Dyke got injured. So while they brought in another attacker, one of the attackers already at the club got injured. So it's sort of like the attackers available to select hasn't really changed. The net is still the same as it was prior to Mickey Johnson joining West Brom. So my sympathy doesn't go very far. And I just think this was the complete wrong move for Marshall. We've taken a player who was and still is the top goal scorer for Premier League 2 under-21s. He's got 16 goals this season. He's still the top goal scorer despite obviously moving to West Brom in January. We're now in March. By the way, George Earthy's crept up that list. He's 9th in the list now. 7 goals George Earthy's got, scored again. He's getting the goals. He's grabbing highlights at the under-21s right now. But for Marshall, who's still a top goal scorer, may finish the season as top goal scorer, he's gone there and his minutes are difficult to come by. Now, when I watched him against Southampton, it was a difficult game because Southampton, they were in automatic promotion spaces at that time. They're now in the playoffs because, funny enough, when Flynn Downs got injured, one low move we did get right. However, I think it's easy to get the Flynn Down ones correct. Just loan him to any Championship club. We know he's a top midfielder in Championship. That's why we signed him. But anyway, Southampton lost Flynn Downs and started struggling, so they've dropped down the place a little bit. Downs has come back and they're doing better again. Anyway, Marshall come on and he had no chance. He was isolated up front. The ball was getting hoofed at him. He's physically really small. He got bullied. The defenders didn't even have to get near him to bully him. It was a very difficult game to put him in. And he was on to a hiding to nothing really. He just didn't have a chance. He played nearly half an hour and he got on the ball a couple of times. He didn't lose it. He passed it reasonably well. It was a very difficult game to make an impact on. However, since then, West Brom have played at favourable times for watching them. We played on Friday last week. So I was watching the Bundesliga game, but thinking, keeping an eye on West Brom, because if he comes on, I'll switch over and watch Callum Marshall. He didn't come on. At the minute, his game time's just non-existent at West Brom, and it's a struggle to see it improving anytime soon. They've got the playoffs up for grabs. It's business end of the season for them, and I just think a move to a lower league club would have been the right thing. I think the club loaning him out, by the way, was the right thing to do. He's smashing at under 21. There's almost no challenge for Callum Marshall at under 21 level. Loaning him out was the right thing. I just think we put him to the wrong club. You look at Louis Barry, who's on loan at Stockport from Aston Villa. He's been missing for the last few months, 3 months I think he's been missing for. However, prior to his injury, he scored 9 goals in 15 games or something as they were top of League 2. He's coming back from injury very soon. But he's a year older, 2 years older than Callum Marshall. Villa put him to League 2 to get the goals, to get roughed up and get him ready for Premier League football. And I just think that's a move we should have done. Put him to a club where he was almost guaranteed minutes, where he was the best attacker at the club. We put him somewhere where, truth be told, I think opportunities were going to be very hard to come by, and we've got it wrong. Hopefully, next season we can get that loan move right and we can put Marshall somewhere for the whole year. He gets game time, he gets loads of minutes, he gets some goals, and he can improve and learn his trade somewhere else. Because loan moves isn't something traditionally we do well. Flynn Downs is working out really well at the minute, but like I said, it was always going to. Kadua's been a bit hit and miss since going to Wickham, more miss. Potts has been fantastic at Wickham thus far, I believe. Last time I spoke to my Wickham fan that I've been speaking to about Potts, it's been a little while ago, but since then he's played in the semi-final, they've done well, came off the bench at the weekend, so he's got minutes, that one's worked out. But the player development part is crucial that we get it right. There's more pressure on clubs now more than ever to get your academy working. Because of the constraints of FFP, you have to spend really wise. As when discussing with Kieran Maguire, as he's explained, that having your homegrown player, your player coming out from the academy, and you sell that player, they're pure profit. That player that you can sell for money that you didn't pay anything for is incredible for when it comes to FFP. That's why Chelsea like to sell their academy players, because it's just pure profit. That's why this summer they need to raise 40 million. Instead of selling a player for 40 million that they've brought in, they're looking at potentially selling their captain, Conor Gallagher, because he's pure profit. So there's a pressure on now to get players from your academy so that you don't have to spend tens of millions on 25 players for your squad. So West Ham need to start using our academy better. It was hard not to watch Klopp's youngsters come on in the final and contribute positively to them winning it. And then they went and beat Southampton in the FA Cup again with youngsters playing. Well, our youngsters outperformed those youngsters previously. Now, that doesn't necessarily always tell the full story of the player's ability. That's a completely different discussion over what clubs prioritise at youngster level. Some prioritise results. The coaches want to win the games, but it's not necessarily the best thing for player development, whereas other coaches focus purely on player development and don't pay too much attention to the results. That's a discussion for a different day, and that's why they keep changing the format of the under-21 games. But we need to do better. Our under-18s did fantastically well. The under-21s have done well. We need to now bridge the gap and start getting some of these into the first team. And it's not an easy thing to do. And like I said, in the past, historically, there's no evidence that the club have got it wrong. I don't think it's that black and white. As I always argue, it's not that black and white due to the player development or lack of it. But when we look at Brighton, and this is more with, while I just discussed FFP, this is more with buying players in mind. Because when we were linked to Ibrahim Osman, never heard of him, we were linked to him, X said he's our top target. Oh, very good, right? This is the type of profile I want. Someone that we can come in and hopefully double our money on if we need to. Buy him for 19 million instead of 49 million, as he could be worth in a couple of years' time. And I'm not going to lie, when I seen Brighton going for him, I thought, there you go, that's all the convincing I needed. But I still had this asterisk next to it, which is, would like to sign him, asterisk. But what are we going to do? Because Brighton have a plan. For every player Brighton signed, they have a plan when it comes to the player development. Brighton don't just buy a player and he's suddenly ready for the Premier League. There's a bit in the middle that happens at the club and out on loan. Brighton loan the players out, get them ready, bring them back, and they can go into the first team and replace whoever it is they're replacing. But they're buying a player with potential, I would argue, isn't the most difficult part. The most difficult bit is the development bit. How do you buy this player who could make it in the Premier League, but how do you turn him into one that will make it in the Premier League? That's the big question. If we've now got Steiden that can do the buying, do the identifying, and bring them to West Ham, good. We've done half the battle. That's ticked off. But what are we doing with that player? Are we just going to throw them in the first team and say to the manager, whether it's Moyes or somebody new next season, make it work? Do we have a plan? Are we going to loan them out? And that's why when we brought in Osman, now it was a bit different because of the circumstances, which was Fornals and Benrahma were off skis, so there was a blatant vacancy and need for a new left winger in the squad. So he would have probably got game time. But it won't always be like that. What's the plan to replace Anna Cresswell? Are we going to bring in a 19-year-old and just throw him in the deep end and say, there you go, that's your second choice left back? Or are we going to bring somebody in that we develop away from the first team for a couple of years? In year 3, he's now ready to take over from Aaron Cresswell, as it should be. We should be looking at our right backs now. I'd imagine Soufal will be here next season. I'd imagine Soufal and Ben Johnson will be the right backs at West Ham next year, right? I think we need to buy one, but I wouldn't be surprised. But if that's the case, in the summer, we should be able to plan for a new right back, and he's not in the first team next year. But the year after, when we do need to replace Soufal, he's already at the club and he's already ready to step into Soufal's shoes. That is the bit that's missing at West Ham right now. We don't have that. When we move a player on, we don't look to the under-21 and say, right, your turn, up you come. We don't have that. We look at the transfer market and say, well, who can we bring in? Because that guy's not good enough. That guy there, not good enough. We don't play him. He's not in the first team. That bridge between the under-21s, and I include the new purchases in there, so the youngsters, whether they're at the academy or you bring them in, how are we bridging the gap between becoming a youngster and being in the first team at West Ham United? Because at the minute, I don't think we know how to do it. There's not enough evidence. There's more evidence to suggest we don't know. And a large part of player development comes down to the loans. First of all, deciding if it's the right move to loan them out or keep them at the club. And second of all, if you decide to loan them out, getting that right. Because as it stands right now, we're possibly going to pretty much waste 4 or 5 months of Callum Marshall's development. Now, he may go to West Brom and not get many minutes, but learn new things. The manager he's playing under at the minute is really good. He's a really good tactical manager, plays a different style of football to David Moyes. Some people would probably like him at West Ham if Moyes moved on in the summer. So he will have some development there. But are we getting the best out? Was that the best move for Callum Marshall? At the minute, looking at his minutes, it's difficult to suggest it was. I think the club have possibly got this one wrong. And I hope I'm wrong. There's 11 games to go in the Championship. Possibly 13, 14, depending on how they get on in the playoffs. There's plenty of game time for Callum Marshall. There's still time for it to turn around there, and hopefully come the end of the season, this looks like a stupid video. Marshall's in the first team at West Brom, scoring goals and fiving them to the Premier League. That would be ideal. But in terms of probability, I would suggest that's unlikely at the minute. And I don't blame Callum Marshall whatsoever. He deserved his loan move. He signed a new contract, went out on loan, good for him. And I think West Brom were probably the best club that came for him. But I don't think they were the right club for him. And this is something we as a football club need to get better at. And we need to get better at it now. So in the summer, when Scarfman goes about his business, if he brings in a couple of players that are not ready for the first team, good. And we've done this in the past. That's nothing new, by the way. Louis Ao. Why can't I say it? Louis Ao. You know the guy, the Brazilian centre. We brought him in. Not the first one. We've brought in quite a few players that would put them in the under 21s, and we just don't see them. Those two Portuguese attackers we brought in, Deju. One of them was Deju. Mipo. Oh, Debeco, another one. Players we bring in, put them in the under 21s, hoping they'll be ready for the first team. It might be lack of talent, but you know what? It's possible that when we brought them in, they did have that potential to go on and play for the first team, but it was the development stages that we got wrong. And that's something that we need to sort out pronto. FFP means you need to use your academy more now than ever. Scarfman in charge of transfers means we now need to have that development plan. Callum Marshall suggests we still don't have it, and we need to sort it out ASAP before the summer transfer window, because if we do and we get it right, it could save us millions and it can make us millions. Get it wrong, it'll cost us millions. Simple as that as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, there you go. That's my ramble for Monday. If you've somehow enjoyed it, please do drop a like on the video by clicking thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new to Hammers Chat, and if you don't mind supporting the channel, please head over to patreon.com/Hammers Chat. Earlier on today, we did the play ratings, myself and Gonzo, from the Everton win. Spoiler, I gave Areola and Alvarez a 10 out of 10. Thought they were both sensational at Goodison Park. And also Gonzo did a Q&A with Dean Ashton, where we put patrons questions to Dean Ashton, which was 45 minutes long. And a really interesting chat. And, well, quite frankly, there was a question put to Dean Ashton, which was pretty much, did you consider suing Sean Mike Phillips? Anyway, the Q&A is there if you fancy checking it out. I'll catch up with you tomorrow when we've got the Freiburg preview, as European football is back this week. Looking forward to it. I'll catch you then.